Hello everybody, welcome to Walls Wheels and welcome back to yet another video. And in this particular video, we're taking a look inside the British Motor Museum. So as soon as we walk into the museum, this is the site we're greeted with. So there's an old Starley Rover safety cycle, a bicycle. There's Wolseley Autocar #1 with a top speed of 12 miles an hour. That was pretty quick back in the day when this was produced. I like the horn. Look at that. But that makes a fun noise. Over here, the world these days is going electric vehicle mad, but over here we've got a Bedford with Lucas electrical drivetrain system. That's rather interesting. Down here, an MG old #1. No, really, that is what it's called. It's got a top speed of 82 miles an hour. It's probably about roughly the same as my Mini these days. Early Land Rover. 1948 Series 1. Now this little Mini here, this is very interesting. You see this one is the very first production Morris Mini Minor. That's right, this is where the Mini adventure all started. Awesome. Over here we got the first production open two-seater Jaguar E-Type. And yes, this will have been the one that Jeremy Clarkson drove on Top Gear several years ago. Over here we've got a 2002 Rolls-Royce Phantom. I will say, Rolls-Royce cars are always very, very elegant. I mean, the one thing about this, well, not this particular one, but pretty much every Rolls-Royce really, is the fact that that centre logo in the centre of the wheel, that always stays upright. It never turns with the wheel, it just always stays upright. It's the little details. I will explain before we go too much further that we do have to wear a mask inside the museum. But that's fine, you don't need to see my face that much in this anyway. This just down here, Rover SD1 Estate. Fun fact about the SD1s actually, they were only the 5th new model that Rover had introduced since the war. That's rather interesting. Next up we've got this Austin A30 convertible. These I always think are really very sweet. And this was a prototype potential replacement for the Mini. This was, of course, before BMW had any involvement with the Mini, but look, it had a hatchback. So in some ways you could maybe link this to the Metro and how that evolved from this sort of idea. And this prototype here, this is from 1969, so the Mini had been in production for 10 years by this point. And they're already looking to replace it with a hatchback model. This here is a Triumph Lynx prototype, and you can really see the design language of the time in it, in that the bonnet slopes down, and of course you've got the pop-up headlights, which of course featured on the TR7. This up here on its own little plinth is an MG Mini ADO 34 from 1964. So obviously it's based upon the Mini, but with an MG convertible body shell. That's certainly different. This one here is an MG Mini ADO 70, which I would fully assume, because I don't actually know, is a follow-up to that design. But again, this is a prototype. I actually kind of think, towards the back, it looks rather like a Fiat X19. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And this is the 1985 MG EXE. Certainly a design of its time. Rather looks like a Jaguar XJ220 supercar from this angle. What do you think? This here is a 1978 Austin Princess Ogle 1020 glassback. So called because it's got a glass back. So this here is a 1962 Mini Moke, but there's something very interesting about it, and that is it has two engines. Yes, this here is a twinny moke. Now the reason they added the two engines into this car is so that it would end up being a four-wheel drive model, which was obviously for the use of the army and things like that. So they had full off-road capabilities for very rough terrains. The major issue with a twinny of any sort is, of course, trying to link up the two engines to work in harmony, of course, because at the time things were not always as precise. I mean, bearing in mind you didn't have robots building these engines back when the moke was obviously in production, so it had to all be set up by hand. And yeah, it's not very easy to set up these things. So ultimately the twinny as a 4x4 model of the mini moke, it didn't work. I do like this one's number plate though, but then again I do like dogs, so dog. As a military vehicle then, the moke was very flawed. You had, of course, the big issue with it was its ground clearance. As you can see there is not very much at all. So BMC set to work on a replacement for it, which sort of solved all the foibles of it. So this is the Austin, and it has got raised ground clearance and a better four-wheel drive system than a twin engine Mini could ever do. As well as that, of course, one of the big issues with having a twin engine is twice the amount of maintenance, of course. With the Austin only having the one engine, it was again an A series, 1275cc in this case, but what BMC did was they tilted the A series engine backwards and added a high-low transfer gearbox together with power takeoff to drive the rear wheels. This would obviously give it four-wheel drive and basically give it go-anywhere abilities. So essentially, a very small Land Rover, and to be quite honest, you can see quite a bit of Land Rover design in it, especially from the side profile. The back here, however, looks very mini pickup. This here is a Gutty made by the company called Nuffield. This here is a prototype. I don't believe it actually went into production. A Rover Alvis P6BS mid-engine sports car prototype. And this here is an Austin Xander, which looks very futuristic, considering this car was done in 1969. You compare that with the 69 Mini replacement over there, the 9X. This here is a 1956 Rover T3, but something that's interesting about this is the engine in it is a gas turbine engine. Now the gas turbine sort of developed from the jet engines developed during World War II. It's amazing how you think that can power a car as well as obviously supersonic jets these days. A Rover T4 gas turbine saloon. Looks very much like a P6. This little car here is a 1965 Rover BRM gas turbine Le Mans racing car. Look at those tiny windows though. Not a lot of space in there, is there really? So at the back here you've got an Austin Mini Metro 1.3 HLS, a Ford Cortina 2-litre gear, a Reliant scimitar. Princess Anne had one of those, you know. A Wolseley version of the Princess, the Wolseley 2200. That is the last of the line of the Wolseley family. Oh, that's quite sad. In a rather fitting shade of goldy brown. At the back, Hillman's Super Imp. A Royal Mail Reliant Regal Supervan. Not a Robin. At the back, Austin 1100 Mark 1. Here in the foreground, Elvis TE21. Yes, I did just read the sign for that one because I generally didn't know that one. And of course, the Ford Anglia made very famous, of course, in the Harry Potter films. Obviously, this wasn't the one that featured in Harry Potter. You have the famous Le Mans winning Jaguar XJR9. In, of course, the livery of the time. Looking rather splendid, very, very low. This is only coming up to about waist height on me. Over here, Jaguar XJR5, so a smaller version of that, really. And very nice in the flesh. Jaguar Broadspeed, an E-Type Group 44 racing car with essentially no windscreen apart from that little bit of green plastic. Jaguar D-Type and a Jaguar XK120 Coupe. This one happens to be a Monterey record car. And this is a 1966 Jaguar XJ13. This was built to be a potential Le Mans contender, but this particular one never actually competed. In the background just here, 1964 Vauxhall Viva HA Deluxe. Foreground, we have an MG Z8 Magnet, Austin A40 Farina, Austin Metropolitan, Standard Family 8, Triumph Mayflower, Armstrong Siddeley, Ford Anglia E494A. It's quite different to the E93A I'm more familiar with, but very lovely nonetheless. A Rover P4 Cyclops, so called because it's got that centre headlamp look. Ooh. And in the foreground, a Morris Minor MM, the first of the line. Fun fact about the Morris Minor that I'm sure many of you will already familiar with, but for those of you who aren't, when this was produced, the car was seen to be too narrow and it looked rather disproportionate. So what they did to fix the issue was they cut it in half, not too dissimilar to that MGB just over there in the background, and they welded in this little plate to make it 4 inches wider, and that's given us the Morris Minor we know and love today. Of course, as well, thing you'll notice about this being a very early one, the headlights are a lot lower. Now when of course they ended up having to make the headlights higher due to regulation, that design, because this was done by Alec Isagonis, he didn't like the later design, he much preferred this older one. But then he was a man who never liked people meddling with his work. This liveried Reliance Supervan will be very familiar to those of you who used to watch the Only Fools and Horses BBC TV show. But this particular one didn't just have a starring role in Only Fools and Horses. Oh no, because if you look under the yellow paintwork on this one, you will see some blue. There we go, some in-focus blue. And now you see the reason for that being is this particular car here also happened to star in Mr. Bean. And yes, this was the car that ended up being rolled over on many separate occasions. The BBC obviously had quite a lot of these, so why not use them amongst multiple programmes? Besides, it's brought us many hours of entertainment through obviously Mr. Bean and of course Only Fools and Horses, so this car has definitely served its purpose. So in this little row we've got an old Wolseley police car. (1936) MG SA and Vauxhall H-Type. Ooh, this is nice. Riley 9 Kestrel. Bit of a soft spot for Rileys. The standard 1012 Speedline. Probably copyrighted music. Morris Cowley. Austin 1216. The standard 9 in the background. And a Leyland's Trojan Tourer. Notice how the wheels are very different on the Leyland compared to the standard. Bear in mind there's only about 5 years of development between the two of them, this one being the older one of the two. Yeah, quite different. This looks more like a railway sort of setup really with the design of it. I'm not quite sure what this one is. I'm sure someone in the comments can tell me. And here we have Racing Point's 2020 development of a Dakar car. That is of course a joke. No, this one is a 1968 Land Rover in Pink Panther livery. The reason this one was pink is because it was a lot better for camouflage in the desert when seen from above. So there we go. I didn't know that, so I've learned something from here today. I always thought yellow would have worked best in the desert, but no, apparently pink works best from above. Would you believe it? 1949 Land Rover Series 1 station wagon. It looks rather like a very small bus in profile from the front. We have here a Camel Trophy Land Rover Discovery. Set to take part in the Camel Trophy Rally. Notice the ramps on top of this one to get it out of trouble when it reaches a tricky spot. That's quite clever. Definitely a good use of space on it. Notice on this particular Land Rover it has got caterpillar tracks with 4 small wheels on each wheel, so 16 small wheels in total, with obviously the caterpillar tracks running around the outside. This was to obviously give it even greater off-roading abilities. Although it doesn't look like it, this is a Land Rover 101. I've actually driven one of these on a off-roading course somewhere down in Dorset. I will say it's very fun, but the steering is incredibly heavy on it. Then again, it was for use in the military, and of course those guys, they have to do a lot of workout to keep up their strength, so yeah, for them it would obviously be no trouble, but for me who doesn't work out, I found the steering very heavy. We'll just do a quick sweep around here then. So we've got a McLaren MP412C, Aston Martin Vanquish from 2001, 1970 Jensen FF Series 2, Lotus Europa Series 2 or S2, a Morgan Supersport 3-wheeler with its little V-twin engine on the front, an MGB GT, somebody's slashed in half, MGJ2 Midget, a Morgan 4.4, early one, a Lotus Mark 6, MGTF Midget, a Lotus 7, it's got a twin cam, a TVR Grand Tourer, a Rover Marauder, and an Austin Healey 3000 Mark III. This car here is very, very interesting because this is the 1 millionth Austin. Except for the fact that it also isn't, because Austin at the time got their numbering wrong. Although it is pretty close to being the 1 millionth Austin ever produced. This particular one is an Austin 16 and it was made on the 25th of June 1946. But the really interesting thing about this one is not necessarily the colour or the way it has obviously gone a bit patchy over the years, but if you look everywhere around it, you have the signatures of everybody who worked at Austin all over the car. Yes, for this particular one here, every single person that worked at Austin signed the car off to say it was perfect and it was good for the road. I just find that awesome. That's a really good little piece of history, that is. Just here we've got a Rover P5B. This Land Rover here is looking rather smart in its black paint with red pinstriping. And the reason for that being, this was a royal ceremonial vehicle. So you'd obviously have your driver in the front, possibly even a security guard of some sort in there. And of course the royals in the back looking out and waving at everyone else. You can just about see how thick the glass is on the back, obviously for good reason. Although the back of it, that could do with a bit of glass as well. Looks like someone's had a bit of an oil leak. You have here a Van Pla Princess, 1999 Land Rover SVX Concept. And also, despite this being 1999, it still looks relatively modern. Just here you got a 1921 Morris Oxford F-Type, and this particular one belonged to Sir William Morris. Yes, the very chap that started the Morris Motor Company. The design of this bus here looks very, very similar to the one used at Bewley to transport people between the Abbey and the main Motor Museum grounds. This here is a Wolseley E2A Stellite. And here at the back is a 1922 Rover 8. with a flat twin engine. This will be familiar to many car fans, but a Ford Model T down in the foreground. It's a Rover, believe it or not. This is a Rover Imperial 3.5 horsepower motorcycle. This particular car here is a 1909 Albion A6 with 24 or 30 horsepower. It's rather grand and posh, isn't it? And tucked away at the back here we have got a 1907 Riley 9 horsepower, again just like the Rover back there, with a V-twin. So look at the interior. It's so small and compact. This here is an Austin 40 horsepower York. This particular car here is the oldest surviving Rover car. This is the Rover 8 horsepower. Now, before Rover started making cars, they actually made bicycles, motorcycles and sidecars. So you can see how they've developed from that to this. This rather grand looking vehicle is an Albion A1 called a dog cart. At the back here in yellow, Wolseley 10 horsepower. A Royal Riley motorised tricycle. And just here in 1899, and just here we have an 1899 Wolseley 3.5 horsepower voiturette. This was the very first four-wheeled Wolseley car. This is not an original vehicle, however it is a full-scale replica of the Benz patent Motorwagen, believed to be the world's very first motorised vehicle, and of course the world's first recognised car. So without this design, we wouldn't have come to where we are today. This car here is a 1922 Austin 20, and this one's got quite an interesting little story behind it. So this particular one was bought in 1932 second hand for £33 by a Mr. Philby, and Mr. Philby decided he would drive from London to Cape Town and back, and with this journey he completed it with a round total of 37,000 miles without any serious incidents. After his little trip down to Cape Town and back, Austin actually bought this very car back from him to use it as a splendid example, and I am quoting here, a splendid example of Austin dependability. That's a good little feel-good story, isn't it? This here is a 1955 Austin A90 Westminster, known as Pape's Progress car, as can be seen just on the side in this little graphic. And the reason it was called this is because it belonged to a chap called British Pape, who was a journalist, wartime RAF navigator, and he was also a writer. He happened to be captured during the Second World War, only to escape, and was awarded a military medal for his services. Now, Pape used this very Austin A90 to complete the first ever journey from North Cape in Norway, basically the most northern point of Norway even, to Cape Town in South Africa. Again, another Cape Towny story. And this was between July and October in 1955. In total, the trip covered 17,500 miles. This Austin 7 here is very interesting in the sense that not only is it one of the earliest surviving Austin 7s, but this particular one happens to be a Downton tuned car. And this, well, even better than that actually, this one was owned by Daniel Richmond of Downton Engineering. For those of you not in the know about what Downton is, Downton was a tuning firm for the Mini back in the 1960s and 70s, and even possibly the 80s, and unfortunately they disappeared a few years ago, but they are now back actually. So go and check them out. Speaking of Minis, let us turn our attention to the Mini Rallying Legends. So over here we have 33 EJB. This was the very car that Paddy Hopkirk won the 1964 Monte Carlo Rally in, even with its little spotlight on the top. So just here, March Triumph Formula 3 racing car, March Ford, Formula 1 racing car, Austin 7 side valve single-seater, Austin 7 twin cam single-seater racing car, and this again is lightweight special. Morris Oxford red flash special, look at that nose on it. Austin 100 horsepower. Guess how many horsepower it's got? That's right, 171. Cooper T51, Mini Metro 6R4 rally car. Triumph TR7 V8 Rally, and another Austin Healey 3000, but this one is a rallying version. In this particular corner of the museum, we've got a load of MG speed record attempt cars. This particular car here is a 1998 one, and it appears to use a very modified version of the TF front bumper. You can still see the face in it, can't you? When you look at the interior of one of these older Formula 1 racing cars, you can really see the risks the drivers were taking when they strapped themselves into one of these. Bearing in mind the speeds they were going back then weren't exactly slow either. Yeah, a good few many died driving cars of this era, so full respect to those who did. Great Scott! Over here we got a DeLorean DMC-12, but this particular one is in. With this particular car, it isn't actually an original movie car, this is a very carefully created replica. I will say in his favour though, this particular one has had the dashboard signed by Dr. Emmett Brown himself, Christopher Lloyd. So that's got it working in its favour, but an interesting thing about the DeLorean is that the bodywork on it is made out of stainless steel, so it will never rust. This rather busted up Land Rover Defender here was in fact used in the 2012 James Bond film Skyfall. This Land Rover Defender here from 2001 was used in the Tomb Raider film with Angelina Jolie in it. This rather long pink car will be very familiar to those of you who watched the 2004 Thunderbirds film, because this car here was designed to be for Lady Penelope and of course her driver Parker. Now an interesting fact about this one, it was designed to look like a futuristic Rolls Royce, but this particular one is actually a Ford. Yes, Rolls Royce weren't available to make a car at the time, so Ford ended up getting the contract. This one here is a Land Rover, but it is Judge Dredd. It was used in the 1995 film Judge Dredd. This particular one happens to be one of 22 cars made for the film. So now we're walking into the future. This one here is an 1897 Bursey electrical cab. And you can see, considering the fact we've had over 100 years of progression between what this was an electric car and what we have now, you can see just how far we've come. This car here is a Crumpton Leyland electric car. I suppose in proportions it's not too dissimilar to the Smart 4.2, but this one is fully electric. Just here we got an all-new electric Jaguar I-Pace. So it looks very different to the 1897 carriage over there, doesn't it? So just over here we've got Jaguar Land Rovers looking to autonomous vehicles. So all around it you've got sensors and cameras and things that will be feeding many thousands of gigabytes of data to it, letting it know everything that's going on around it. And this supposedly will be your taxi driver of the future. Yes, this will just go around the streets and you'll have an app on your phone and call it, and you'll be able to go wherever you want to go, therefore ending the private car ownership. Over here we've got a little protest sign, obviously protesting the end of Rover. Sad times. This particular model here was designed to be a replacement for Rover's 200 and 400 series cars, but obviously Rover died before anything like this could enter production. You can certainly see the BMW influence on it, especially from this angle. So this little car here is a Ford, and I'd fully imagine it's based upon the Ka or KA chassis. and platform. But this is the Ford Think, and it's fully electric. Triumph TR3A, a smaller Triumph TR3A. It's a pedal car, this one, for kids. So when mummy and daddy got a new car, son or daughter could have one as well. Rather lovely Morris fire engine. This here is a 1929 Morris Minor. This here is a 1913 Morris Oxford light car with 10 horsepower, and it's got a bull nose. It's a rather well-known Morris design language of the time. Austin 7 Swallow from 1931. Just look how narrow it is. (1923) Austin 7 Chummy. 1938 Austin 7 Ruby. Now Matt from Furious Driving drove one of these not too long ago, so go and give his channel a check out and maybe go and watch that video as well. It was quite an interesting one. Austin 7 Avon. Oh look, an imposter. A German has made its way into the British Motor Museum. Now the British Motor Museum is literally just aimed towards British cars, but this one obviously is a BMW, as you can see by the badge on it. And the reason this is here is this is actually an Austin, but it was an Austin sort of produced under license by BMW in Germany. I have to say it looks rather gorgeous in red. Upstairs in the cafe area we've got a 1989 Reliant Scimitar SS1. Located rather unfortunately outside the toilets, this is the Jaguar F1 car from 2000. This particular one here was driven by Northern Irishman Eddie Irvine. Now Jaguar were of course bought out by the Red Bull team and now races in F1 under Red Bull. So this car here is a Road Rover. Basically working on the success of the Land Rover. However, it's supposed to go in between Rover's range and Land Rover's range, so a kind of midway car between the two brands. This here is the first of the line of the Range Rover Evoques. This one's a 2011 one. 2002 Range Rover 4.4. This here's a concept car. This is the Range Rover Range Stormer. Looking good in orange. You do get a good view of the whole museum from up here. An old Wolseley just sat on top of the roof here. This caravan down here is really rather large, and bear in mind this was built in the 20s or 30s roughly. I can't imagine the cars towing that would have had very much power at all or even very much torque. So I can imagine the family holiday in that would be very, very slow. I mean, I've towed my small trailer with the Mini before, and that's likely has got more horsepower than the cars that would have towed this, and the trailer is lighter than this, so yeah, I can imagine how painfully slow that journey would be. This is a 1994 Range Rover 4 litre. This is the first of the line of the second generation. This particular Range Rover here is a state ceremonial vehicle, so very similar to the Land Rover that's located literally just the other side of that wall down on the bottom floor. It's really rather interesting, isn't it? Again, thick glass. A lot more luxurious than that Land Rover though, it has to be said. And of course this very car, this is the first of the line Range Rover. This is where the Range Rover story all started. I do realise we sort of work backwards from it, seeing the latest models all the way up to the very first Range Rover, but I have to say this one looks absolutely fantastic in this blue. Just look at that, wow. And here is the MGB GT split in half. Happens to be a left-hand drive model, this one. But look at all that engineering work in there. It's so intricate and fine. Look at it. And on this side, the passenger side, or to the UK at least, the driver's side. Didn't notice these earlier, but you've got a Triumph TR6, MG Midget, the later one with the raised ride height and plastic bumpers, which Sort of ruined the handling on them a little bit, but less said about that the better. And what I believe to be on the top, a Triumph GT6 in a rather lovely fetching shade of yellow. And this here, as we make our way towards the exit of the museum, is a 1933 Ford Model Y. Now, you may be wondering why the Ford is in the British Motor Museum. That's because although Ford is an American brand, many of their models were made in the United Kingdom. That's the Dagenham Works near London. And that concludes our little walk around the British Motor Museum. I'll come over here because there's a bit of music playing right by the entrance. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like. If you want to say something, please leave a comment down below. And of course, if you want to see more of this kind of content in the future, please remember to subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week. Farewell.